If we try to compare to previous times, we all move much less on average. But first of all, the most important question: what are the actual consequences of a lack of exercise? So how much do you sit every day? Do you usually move around a lot at work and prefer to relax on the couch afterwards? And now put your hand on your heart and answer, how many hours a week do you really spend just doing nothing? Before you start doing the math, let's point out that I am explicitly talking about doing nothing physically and lying around lazily. And this question also includes your school, your university, or your work, where you spend most of your time. And in fact, this affects many of us because it makes little difference to the body whether we are sitting on the sofa and watching TV or we are working on tasks at our desk. This physical inactivity, including the journey to work in the car, for example, adds up to our life quite naturally. And it is becoming more and more and more. And we are already seeing the consequences of this today, but actually things could get much worse in the future. Hello, my name is Dr. Tobias Wegel. With my YouTube channel, I want to provide medical, understandable, and correct information about symptoms, clinical pictures, but also topics such as health, exercise, and sports. This is so important and of course is linked to illnesses, typical widespread diseases. If you don't want to miss anything, then subscribe to my channel now. Clearly, and this has been proven time and again by science and studies, we all move much less on average compared to earlier times. Perhaps, let's think about how your exercise behavior has changed. Combined with a richer diet, of course, this leads to the fact that we as a society are getting fatter and fatter. And that's what we really see in our patients. And the lack of exercise has even more serious consequences than just getting fat, namely for muscles, for the cardiovascular system, and even for our brain. And today, in this video, we are going to take a look at when a lack of exercise becomes dangerous, what you should look out for, whether you have perhaps already exceeded this limit, and how we can find the right balance between too little and too much. What are the consequences of lack of exercise? But first of all, the most important question: what are the actual consequences of a lack of exercise? Because the answer to this question ultimately gives us two very important symptoms by which you can recognize that you are not moving enough. And of course, you should also pay attention to these significant symptoms. On the one hand, we can detect early symptoms, which is a good thing. And on the other hand, we can take countermeasures in good time in order to avoid diseases. And in addition, this information also helps all those affected who do not even realize that they are not moving enough. And an occasional walk would, of course, make a lot of their complaints disappear quite easily. However, the difficult thing is often that you don't know, or if you do know, you don't feel like changing the situation. But for now, let's stay with the topic I have just raised. A direct consequence of lack of exercise is actually clearly overweight. That is too much fat, and especially belly fat. Thanks to ready-made products and sugary foods, we consume a lot, more and more unnecessary calories that our body does not need. And at the same time, we also move less and less. I don't think I need to complete this calculation now, as it's clear to each of us. After all, our weight has been skyrocketing in society as a whole for decades. This means that more and more of us are getting fatter. We are eating more calories than our body consumes, so to speak. As an individual and as a person affected, I see that this decision is of course up to each of you. But it has to be said that this also has devastating consequences for society, for us as a whole. The costs for the healthcare system are skyrocketing, because obesity is definitely one of the main drivers of many diseases. That's important to know, and I have to mention that issue. Diabetes, back pain in general, joint problems, problems with metabolism, heart disease, then heart attacks and so on are just a few examples at the top of a long list, a really long list with possible consequences. And at the same time, however, being overweight also leads more and more to the fact that people naturally withdraw from society and are dependent on psychological help. And of course, if you know that you are overweight, you are not satisfied with it. So, to put it bluntly, is it all a consequence of your laziness? I wouldn't go that far now. But on the other hand, we can accurately state that regular exercise and sport have a clear positive effect on our mental and physical health. That's clear, that's the way it is. And I'll come to that in a moment. So what are the symptoms of lack of exercise? Let's stay for a second and discuss the consequences of lack of exercise. The symptoms of lack of exercise can be really diverse and different, depending on how and where its consequences first appear. Since this is also different for each of us individually, it is sometimes really difficult to make the direct connection to the lack of exercise. And because this connection is often missing, you don't even realize that a lack of exercise is perhaps so bad. Today, I have already mentioned cardiovascular disease as an example. Like any other muscle, the heart muscle loses its strength if it is not stressed as much. So, if you sit around too much, you just let your heart slacken. To put it bluntly, climbing stairs or doing sports becomes more and more difficult from time to time. And sometimes, even then, a vicious circle develops, of course, from which we can no longer get out. We try to avoid doing sports because it is so strenuous for us. And as a result, we no longer strain the heart, which would be important. This, of course, will make sport even more difficult in the future, and the overcoming will be even greater, and thus perhaps the laziness will be even higher, so to speak. The long-term health consequences are then initially high blood pressure, that's where it starts, and then at some point a heart attack or stroke. What applies to the heart muscle also happens in the rest of the body. Muscles are, let's say, a luxury good for the body, for our body. You should also make sure of this or know this. On the one hand, it is expensive in terms of energy supply, and on the other hand, it is rarely used. Our inner Neanderthal doesn't like such a combination at all. Of course, after all, this makes it more difficult for us to survive in a famine, and the result is that our muscles continue to be broken down more and more in the event of inactivity. Of course, we don't notice it at first, but increasingly all actions in everyday life may become more difficult. And perhaps you have also noticed this when you have been ill, perhaps lying in bed for a week or longer, feeling that your muscles are less strong. At the same time, joints also become unstable and our risk of injury naturally increases. Overall, the decrease in muscle mass is a huge problem of aging. And in fact, we can't avoid this problem as we get older. In addition, there is one of the reasons why I declare lack of exercise to be a widespread disease, another reason, namely back pain. In 2019, only 23% of all Germans stated that they had not suffered from back pain in the last 6 months or longer. At the same time, 13% of us experience it every day. 13% of all of us. So we have a disease that affects more than 3/4 of our society, and in some cases with slipped discs and so on, leads to incapacity to work. Therefore, it really is a problem for society as a whole. And in addition, almost 20% of all prescriptions for physiotherapy were due to or for back pain. So, of course, the scale and spread of this problem should really make us sit up and pay attention to it. After all, physiotherapy and regular simple physical activity are for sure the best remedies for back pain. Unfortunately, we too often decide against the stress and in favor of convenience. The key word here is our laziness. But let's get away from the back because another area is often completely forgotten if you don't even talk about it. That is our digestive system. And our digestive system is absolutely dependent on us moving and being physically active. This is very important. The movements and vibrations ensure that everything, it has to be said, virtually slips to where it should go. And at the same time, the movement promotes blood circulation. Instead, sitting, that is inactivity, places greater pressure on the organs, and your stomach and intestines cannot develop freely. That's why you are always said after you've eaten something, you have to go out and get some exercise. So one of the consequences of lack of exercise is digestive problems triggered by blockages. And how can I recognize a lack of exercise? To find an answer to this question, you really have to be quite realistic. You have to estimate how much you move, and you have also to be honest with yourself, of course. So how much do you sit every day? Do you usually move around a lot at work and prefer to relax on the couch afterwards? And how do you get to work? Particularly with our patients whose diet and lifestyle we have to observe and monitor for some medical reasons, we see time and again that many people firstly underestimate what they eat and drink, and secondly overestimate how much they move and exercise. We see this in our patients, and it is therefore likely that it also applies to each of us in everyday life. Or rather, it shows how little we actually move. It has to be said now that especially in static professions with a lot of desk work, we often miss thousands and thousands of steps a day compared to other people. And it could be so easy, because every step helps us in the short and long term. Really, exercise is good for you, walking steps is good for you. So the earlier we intervene, the easier it is for us to return to an active life and the less damage we have suffered so far. And what is the therapy for lack of exercise? How does that work? The answer to this question is also actually quite obvious. We simply have to get moving. And we don't need a complicated training program, no weights, no aerobics group, no particularly good tips from anyone or anything else. Just get moving. To start with, good weather and a nice walking route are really already enough. According to the WHO, even 150 minutes of moderate activity, that is, not jumping around in any way, but moving briskly, is enough to protect us from most of the consequences of lack of exercise. So this is not about excessive sports, but about exercise in the form of walks. In the case of intense exercise, if you do it, 75 minutes are enough. That's an average of 3 long walks. And if we talk about intensive exercise, that's an average of 2 sports sessions per week. Of course, I could also say that more always helps more. But for many people, the first thing to do now is just to get out of the state of doing nothing, to get out of the state of laziness. And this beginning is, of course, always difficult. but it's never too late to start living more actively again. On the contrary, those affected are always amazed at how quickly back pain disappears, for example, when they go for a walk a few times a week. And even if we don't have enough time for whatever reason, we can really make a big difference to our health by making a few small, simple changes in our lives. But once again, it's important to remember that it's ultimately up to you, and you set the priorities in your life on your own. How do I add more exercise into my life? Even at work, we can significantly increase the number of steps we take without changing much in our daily routine. So if you don't have enough free time for walks or for sports, then try to move while you work. In larger offices, of course, the elevator is always tempting, but the stairs can offer you a quick mini workout. We get our hearts pumping and engage our leg muscles a little without really exhausting ourselves. So it's just perfect exercise for our purposes. And I also use the stairs in the hospital again and again instead of the elevator. If you take the bus to work, you can, of course, get off the bus one stop earlier, if the weather is nice, and then walk the last few meters or change to your bike. And in this way, of course, you arrive at work fresh and awake, and you have already achieved the first movement and the first sports goal of the day, so to speak. For others, however, it is easy to set aside time specifically for sports in their daily routine. So just see what works best for you. But really, start doing it right now. And let's say it again. You don't have to start doing extreme sports straight away. Just try to think about and find out how you can get more exercise in your everyday life. The keyword is stairs, the keyword is taking a walk instead of the car, and so on. I have to mention one group in particular: parents. On the one hand, parents have a great opportunity to get more exercise, thanks to their children, of course. And on the other hand, parents also have a responsibility not to pass on their inactivity to the next generation. Why do I say that? This study here on the screen shows us that parents have a really huge influence on their children's exercise behavior. Sure, we parents are the role models. Laziness or lack of exercise can therefore be trained, but it can just as easily be untrained. So the decisive factor here is the good role model. And the bottom line is that a clear picture is emerging in this issue. Physical inactivity and lack of exercise are perhaps well on the way to becoming a widespread disease, or may even already be a widespread disease. By the way, laziness, or rather the psychological component that is behind laziness, is actually another topic to discuss. Please let me know if you would also like to discover more about this topic. Write your thoughts in the comments, and let's together discuss the points that I have made in the video today. Thank you very much, and stay loyal to me.